Last night, my husband woke me up at around 11:50 to tell me that somebody had been knocking on our door and ringing our apartment doorbell for about 10 minutes on and off. He woke me so I could possibly ID the person. Once I looked out of our upstairs apartment window, I saw the man walk into his car in our apartment parking lot. It's across the street from our unit. He was wearing blue jeans and a gray t-shirt. He was a medium build, possibly 30-year-old. He had blonde hair as well. He wasn't covering his face or anything. But the thing is, he was carrying what looked like resistance bands or robe. He sat in his car for around 3 minutes while I was on the phone with the dispatch. And then he came back to our door and knocked hard for another few minutes. And dispatch advised me that the police were on their way, and they hung up. I started videoing the vehicle. I read out the tag number and make and model and just watched as he put his car in park and reverse over and over again. Out of seemingly nowhere, he backed out of the parking lot and started rushing away, but not before the officer had arrived and pulled him over. My downstairs neighbor knocked on my door and told me that he had been peering into her little children's windows, and he was pounding on her door as well. She said that her husband had left only 1 minute before he had started knocking at her door. She said that he saw her children through the window and that's why he had continued knocking. Our doors are right next to one another, so he probably didn't know what door he wanted opened. He was watching us as well through our upstairs windows, so I turned all of the lights out and shut the blinds while I had called a dispatch. The police never contacted us for a statement. I've reached out to the dispatch about an update and I'm waiting to see if any action was taken. We're keeping our eyes peeled to see if he's been following us. I'm replacing my porch light bulbs with motion detectors and putting bars in our windows and door tracks. My neighbor and our families are panicked, to say the least. He was outside for about 30 minutes. Update. I am trained in firearm usage and now live in a state where I can open carry and the background check is really quick. We are going this weekend to get a firearm. My husband will be taking some classes as he came from somewhere where owning a gun is illegal, so he's never handled one before. I am still waiting on a call from the responding officer. I have his badge number and name, so if they don't reach out to me today or tonight, he might be working third shift or something. I will call the substation. If they didn't do anything, I will go ahead and make a suspicious persons case for the paper trail. We had no odd encounters last night. However, while I was looking at the video that I took, I remembered that car. I was walking my dog at 8 p.m. about a week ago for him to go to the bathroom, and this car was driving really slow through the parking lot, and it had parked a few spots down from where I was letting my dog sniff. They just sat there with the car running. When I tell you that my ears started ringing and I got an awful feeling, I'm not joking. I turned around and went home, didn't give my dog the chance to pee, and shut every door and window. I think this man has been staking out our apartment building, me and my neighbors too. I think he wanted to get in to where those children were. I'll update more when I have new info. It's been about a week since the incident. I called dispatch today because I never received a follow-up from the responding officer. A sergeant from the police department called me back to give me more information. They said that they had pulled over the man and ran him to make sure that there were no warrants and asked him what he was doing. He told the officer that he was meeting up with an acquaintance. The officer let him go with no further questions. And not only that, the responding officer was also a sergeant. I about lost my mind. The sergeant that I spoke to today stated that he should have looked into it more. It was obviously an attempt at breaking in, sexually motivated and/or with intent to commit a felony. The responding officer is supposed to call me tonight when he gets on duty. I'm livid, honestly. There was zero due diligence for this case, but there's not even a case. No case number, just a documented police contact. I'll follow up when I can. Final update. The officer finally called me. Here's how the conversation went. Hello? I answered groggily. It was well past midnight. Hello, miss. I was told that you have some questions about an incident a few nights ago. Yes, about Thursday. I wanted to know what that man told you he was doing. You know, he was looking in windows and carrying potential restraints. I'm not sure if that was relayed to you. Yeah, I stopped him, ran his tags, and he told me that he was meeting up with a guy from a dating app. He seemed forthcoming and open with his motive for being there. Meeting up with... wait a minute. He was meeting up with someone by looking in windows and knocking on 2 different doors for 20 minutes. I was shocked and still not fully awake. Like I said, he seemed forthcoming and honest with me. Yeah, so was Jeffrey Dahmer, was the first thing that came to mind. With resistance bands? Like workout bands. He had lots of belongings in his car, so he probably just had them in there. Right, but bringing them to a hookup, knocking on multiple doors. He saw the little girls through the window, and he had waited until my neighbor's husband had left to begin knocking. That's on tape, officer. I checked in with the apartment management after the incident. Well, I'm familiar with this individual, and I've been doing drive-thrus of your complex to make sure that he doesn't come back. I haven't seen anything. If you don't have any more questions, I'll let you go, ma'am. It doesn't make sense to me, but thank you, goodbye. And I hung up. I don't have much to say. I just feel so icky about that conversation. Nothing new has come of the situation, and I haven't seen the man or the car. My mind is blown at the lack of follow-up or due diligence. I live in a suburb, and it's not a busy one either. The police department has a small jurisdiction. Guess I'll have to protect myself. "15 years ago, I made one of the worst decisions of my life. I began dealing for a well-known biker gang. No, I wasn't a member, but I had connections to one of their members through my mutual friend, Josh. I had had a short history in dealing years before, but got clean and walked the straight and narrow. I worked 3 jobs and I was saving up for college. However, tragedy struck when a very close relative of mine was murdered by her new husband while they were traveling in his home country. What made this even more difficult is that they had canceled their life insurance, so the cost of returning them to our country and the funeral arrangements, well, that fell on me and 2 other close relatives. Now, this isn't an excuse for what I did. I just wanted to provide some context to what was going through my head when I had met with Josh and asked to set up a meeting with his relative, Mike, who was a well-known member of the biker gang, so that I could get back up on my feet financially. If you're asking yourself why I didn't just pursue one of the millions of other avenues for financial assistance, it's because I was young, stupid, and I wanted to replace that lost feeling with something I thought would make me feel better about myself at the time. So I gathered a team of hand-picked dealers at my house, and I waited for Mike to come by and discuss business. And soon enough, he arrives with 2 pounds of weed to front me. My plan was to only involve myself by distributing to my runners so that I could work my regular jobs while making a passive income. Side note, I had known Mike for about a year at this point, which is why so much was given up front. And the term front means to loan, and the term runner refers to a dealer who works for you. Things went well for over the next year and a half, and my team had expanded. I was making a ton of money. I sold the weed to my runners by the ounce and paid a discount per the pound, and I was making hundreds in profit a week and thousands a month. I was happy and Mike was happy, and he only ever had to deal with me and never had to meet or address any of my runners. However, this is where the story takes a drastic turn for the worse, and why you should never trust a biker gang, especially when you're not working on the inside. I just hired a good friend of mine as a runner, and she needed money. It was a single mother and wanted to sell it to her friends who came over and always needed the weed. The girl ended up selling through ounces faster than anyone else, so I trusted her with more product to sell at once since I would have to come back like 2 or 3 times a week. However, I was going on vacation for 3 weeks and I wanted to make sure that she had access to enough while I was away, so I left her with a lot more than I usually would. When I returned, I had to come to collect and everybody but her was up to date on their payments, and after excuse and excuse, she came to me to inform me that her new scale was set to the wrong measurement system and that she was out a good amount. I was upset and I nearly kicked her off the team, but I had known this girl for years and it wasn't anything that I couldn't recover on my own. However, she came to me when I was supposed to meet up with Mike to re-up, and because this took a lot longer than I thought, well, I was late to meet him. Now, remember when I said that you should never trust a biker unless you operate on the inside? Well, I met up with Mike to let him know what happened, and I apologized for being late. I informed him that the situation had been dealt with, but Mike was furious. He tells me that because I was late, he was late meeting his connect for the weed, and since he was late, this connect would never deal with him again. He told me to meet him at Josh's house and to bring who was responsible for making me late, and if I didn't bring them, then I would be held accountable because this connect had made him $5,000 a week in profit. Yeah, you read that right. This man told me that him being late once dissolved a profitable relationship with a connect that earned him $5,000 a week. I already knew what this meant for my runner, and we were good friends, and there was no way that I was going to allow a single mother to go through what I knew was coming. So I showed up to Josh's house on my own and I waited for Mike. I sat on Josh's couch for what felt like hours, by myself and uncertain of the extent of what was going to happen. Then Mike walks in and greets Josh, talks with his partners a bit while completely ignoring me. First, 5 minutes go by, and then 10 minutes. And then Mike walks over and I remember waking up on the floor. From what I was told, Mike hit me across the head and I blacked out. He had proceeded to hit me for 2 or 3 more minutes until I woke up to him still hitting me. We sat on the couch and with a handgun to my head, he tells me that he's going to charge me the profit that he would have made every week from this connect for the next year. For those keeping track, that's $260,000. He tells me that he's going to be generous enough to do the first payment of 5 within 48 hours, and that the money that I just gave him for my re-up didn't count, and that I needed to return the weed, and that he was giving me 24 hours for each additional $5,000 after that. He took my car, which he underpriced at $10,000. It was a newish Mercedes at the time that I was still making payments on, and essentially planned on using me as a human ATM. At this point, I knew what was happening, and despite our relationship for the past year, he was going to exploit me for as long as he could until he had a reason to get rid of me. So I went home and I thought about my options. I had around $17,000 in cash. My retirement plan savings also amounted to just over $35,000, but even that would only get me by on the payments for a week. I realized that even if I was able to come up with half of the money, I would end up in jail or worse. After 24 hours of deliberating, I considered the fact that Mike had never met any of my runners. My family had moved away from this town after the death of the relative, and there was no way that I was going to risk my life or my freedom for some arbitrary debt. So I took all my cash and made my savings available, and knew that I only had 24 hours to run as fast and as far as I could. 4:30 a.m. I gathered a bag full of clothes, called a lifelong friend of mine who had moved to another country 4 hours away, explained the situation and asked if I could stay on his couch for a week. And I took a bus as close to the Greyhound station as I could get, without stopping in front of it. The Greyhound didn't require photo ID at the time, and I didn't want to fly out of my own city in case anyone saw me, or Mike was able to figure out where I was going by pressing any of the airport staff. At this point, my heart was beating out of my chest because, although the Greyhound isn't as busy as the airport, if Mike or anyone he knew saw me there, it was game over. I waited an hour and then walked inside and bought a ticket for a city about 3.5 hours away that had an airport. Before boarding, I wrote down all my important contacts, removed the battery from my phone, and dropped it down the sewer, and I began my escape. 8:15 a.m. I stop in said city and buy a ticket to go and meet said friend. 12:30 p.m. I land in a country that I've never been to in a city that I had never been to. My friend picks me up and we talk about the situation the entire way home. Him and I had a similar past, and although the story itself is crazy, he understood. When we arrive at his place, I cut my hair, decide on a new name that I'll go by while staying in the city, while deciding my next move. I get a new prepaid phone and number and try to relax. 6 p.m. I was supposed to meet Mike 30 minutes ago. The stress starts to kick in. 8 p.m. We've been drinking and telling stories, and I remember that I hadn't deleted my Facebook. So I jumped on my friend's laptop, threw on a VPN that was located in my home country, and was met with a flood of messages. Josh and Mike had kicked in my front door and destroyed my place. They left messages with the addresses of places they thought that I was hiding out. They told me that they were watching the airport and Greyhound station, and told me that it would be impossible to leave the city. It was at that point that I realized they never knew that I left. Throughout the coming weeks, months, and years, I made a habit of changing phones, and I moved around from city to city and country to country. I even did those work for your accommodation programs in a couple of countries as a tourist. Every few weeks and months, I would get an email from a single friend back home who would tell me that Josh and his girlfriend were telling people to assure me that it was okay to come back and that things had blown over. A couple times, I even tried to reach out to some other friends back home, only to find out that they were trying to cash in on the reward that Mike had placed to anyone who could find out where I was. It eventually became easier to cut contact with anyone and everyone around me if I felt that I needed to move, or felt that I couldn't entirely trust them. I could never go back to who I was or where I came from, physically or mentally. I later found out that Mike had a nasty habit of hiring dealers. Then when he thought that they had made a good amount of money, he would conjure up some dire situation in which they would need to pay him back a crazy amount. He would drain them for every dime they had until they couldn't pay anymore. After that, they would usually end up in a ditch somewhere. One of his associates, who happened to be my next-door neighbor back home, was recently charged for first-degree murder after taking a woman out to the woods and killing her. Although this did a number on my trust issues, I've made a lot of changes throughout my life since the event. I've changed my name, obviously. I'm in my mid-30s now. I have an amazing corporate position in a company that changes lives. I speak to schools about the impact of poverty, and it's taught me to empathize with people in different positions than my own. I own a condo in a very beautiful city. I'm engaged, and I took up learning a second language. And I never take the second chance that I've been given for granted. I've been clean for just over 15 years now. I've never told anyone in my new life about what's happened. I don't even think that they would believe me. Even though that I take full responsibility for my stupidity in my younger years. But to the biker that is waiting to collect on his ridiculous $260K debt, I hope I never see you again.